One of the things that I always tell Christians is if we're going to be in the reason-giving game, it has to work both ways. So if the skeptic comes up to you and asks you, what about this, what about this, what about this? How do you explain all the animals fitting onto the ark? Where did Cain get his wife? All the silly questions that you hear over and over again. Now it works both ways. Hey, you have to be able to give a proper understanding for your belief system too. And once you find out that most people really haven't thought beyond the surface level of their belief. A lot of times they'll answer the first question. It's the second question that gets them, that's really difficult. So I want to give you 5 questions that you can ask your friends who are skeptics or maybe somebody who you've come in contact with. What I want to do in this session is just give you some examples of some of the questions, some of the ways that Pastor Daniel was talking about making this stuff happen. So, it always sounds good in theory, right? But what does that actually look like? So this is called 5 Questions to Ask Skeptics. And I always say that it's important for us to understand the other side, and this is really what it is. And it's a biblical injunction. Proverbs 18:17, it tells us that the first is to plead his case seems right until another comes along and examines him, right? And we see this all the time. Anybody who watches crime dramas, wow, that sounds like a really good witness, or that sounds like a really good story, but maybe not so much. As a matter of fact, I heard the story of a defendant who was on trial for murder, and there was a lot of strong evidence against the gentleman. The prosecutor was doing a really good job bringing out the different pieces of evidence showing his guilt, but see, there was no body, and so it's really hard to necessarily prove a murder when you don't have a corpse. And in the defense's closing statement, the lawyer really brings this out, right? And he says, well, he tried his trick just on a whim. He says, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have a surprise for you all. You see, I have, and he looks at his watch, scheduled within 1 minute for the person who is presumed dead to come walking through those doors. And, the courtroom was aghast. Everybody turns and looks, right? And they wait, and nothing happens. And the defense attorney says, now, I'm sorry. I really did not have the supposed victim scheduled to come through those doors. But I wanted you to know that you all turned and looked, didn't you? That means you have doubt. You thought it was actually possible that the victim was alive. And if you have doubt, you cannot convict my client, because there's reasonable doubt here now that he might not have done it. And he sits down triumphantly. Now, the jury was clearly confused about this. You could tell that they were looking at each other, trying to figure out what went on. They go out, and within about 6 minutes, they all come back. And the lawyer says, oh, that's pretty fast. Wonder what happened. And they came back with a clear guilty verdict for the client. And the lawyer said, well, can you just explain to me how you got that guilty verdict? Because I saw you all look. And the jury foreman said, yes, sir. All of us looked, but we noticed that your client didn't. So it just goes to show that, again, the first to plead his case seems right, but maybe something else comes along. Now, I've done these kinds of things. We go on apologetics missions trips. What are those? Those are trips where we will take a group of folks like you, and we will go someplace where we know that Christianity is not the default assumed worldview. Not even necessarily believing Christians, but so we'll go to radical places like Berkeley, California, or Dearborn, Michigan, where you have a high Muslim population. I'm working on putting together a trip for this August for Washington, D.C., where you can take the stuff that you've learned here and actually use it out in the real world. But I've also gone to, say, Utah, Salt Lake City, and engaged with Mormons. And I was at BYU once, and it was in the lunchroom. They had a bunch of different cafes, and I sit down next to a nice young man who is second-year medical student. So biology is his major. He wants to become a doctor. And I'm talking to him, and I'm saying, you know, that's interesting that you want to become a doctor. I find that. And did you go on your mission? And he goes, yeah, I went on my mission, came back 18 months ago, and now I'm studying. And okay. And I really, this was actually a serious question. I wasn't trying to get him into a gotcha statement or anything. I asked him, I said, well, BYU is an accredited institution, right? And it holds a high standard, and especially in science, it wants to be seen as a formidable academic institution among its peers. Can you tell me how it handles evolution in your biology classes? I'm assuming that you have the biology classes as a medical student. You're going to take all of this stuff. Do they talk about evolution? Oh, yeah, they talk about it. Well, do they? The Mormon Church doesn't hold to evolution, right? He goes, no, they don't hold to evolution at all. I said, well, what do you do with that? If BYU is teaching evolution, BYU is owned by the Mormon Church, but the Mormon Church doesn't hold to evolution, how do you deal with that? What do you do with that? And he said, well, you know, I don't try to reconcile evolution and my faith. I figure just some things I just leave to God and go on. Now that's a startling claim. Think about it. What is he saying? The church may be teaching a contradiction, but I'm just going to let that slide. I'm going to give them a pass. And you see, when you start asking people questions, all of a sudden, some of these things start to come up. Now, I don't know if he went home at night and that was bothering him, but that's the way things look. Look, when Jesus confronted the Sadducees and the Pharisees, he asked questions to see if their worldview was consistent. And you can see this in the Gospels over and over. One of the things that I always tell Christians is, if we're going to be in the reason-giving game, it has to work both ways. So if the skeptic comes up to you and asks you, what about this, what about this, what about this? How do you explain all the animals fitting onto the ark? Where did Cain get his wife? All the silly questions that you hear over and over again. Now it works both ways. Hey, you have to be able to give a proper understanding for your belief system too. And once you find out that most people really haven't thought beyond the surface level of their belief. A lot of times they'll answer the first question. It's the second question that gets them, that's really difficult. So I want to give you 5 questions that you can ask your friends who are skeptics or maybe somebody who you've come in contact with. And here's the first one. Here's the first one you get to ask them. Why are you so intolerant? And usually this takes people by surprise. What do you mean? Well, I have a story that Greg Kokel, who I know is a friend of mine, tells when he was invited to speak at a college campus one day. And he came up to the blackboard, and without saying too much of anything, he writes this sentence on the board. All views have equal merit, and none should be considered better than another. Okay. How many people in this classroom agree with that statement? And you can imagine most all the hands came up, right? Everybody's like, oh yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. Okay. Then he writes a second statement. Jesus is the Messiah, and Judaism is wrong for rejecting that. Now, how many of you what do you think about that statement? And of course, people came off their chairs, right? How can you say that? How can you be so insensitive? How can you this is hurtful, it's wrong to write these kinds of things. You go, wait a minute. Do you see statement number 1? Did you agree with statement number 1? All views have equal merit, none should be considered better than another. If number 1 is true, then number 2 has as much merit as any other statement. Number 2 has as much merit as statement number 1. So either you can hold number 2 in derision, but you have to reject statement number 1, or you have to accept number 2 as equally valid as number 1. Which would you like to do? See, now we have a conversation. You see how that works. It becomes a lot of fun. The one girl who was protesting this told him, that's wrong. You can't write those things. It's wrong to reject another's point of view. And Coco said, well, you got to realize this happens all the time. Matter of fact, it's happening right now. You are rejecting my point of view. Do you not see this? And she goes, but it's intolerant. And she doesn't see that she's violating the tolerance principle even herself. She's not allowing us tolerance even to hold our view that Jesus is the Messiah and Judaism is wrong. So this is what I mean when I start asking about why are you so intolerant. See, tolerance only works if there's something that you disagree with, right? This is what tolerance means. You ever get a pebble in your shoe? Hate that. Or maybe you have to sneeze in your... See, I get on stage and play music sometimes, so if I'm on stage and I have to sneeze, it's not a good thing, because you don't want to do it right in the middle of the song, right? And but if you're walking with a pebble in your shoe and you can't stop, you're late, and you have to, the doors are going to be closing in 5 minutes, and you spent $60 on the tickets, or what have you. You don't stop to pull the pebble. You don't like the pebble, but you tolerate it. I will tolerate this until I reach my goal. We tolerate our diets until we reach our goal. That kind of tolerance means that it's something that you don't necessarily like or want to agree with, but you allow it because you respect the individual. So to tolerate another's point of view means you don't agree with it. You may not even like it, but it can be allowed. You have to have disagreement before you can have tolerance. The relativist will claim all forms of expression are healthy. But this claim denies its own basic premise. Relativism holds that there is no inherent good or bad, right and wrong, but no one can live this way in real life. For example, relativists rear their children in a certain way. They tell you it's wrong to be intolerant. This is what they teach their kids, but they're telling you that there's a right and wrong. So obviously, there has to be a right and wrong for them to start teaching their children this way. They set down rules. The biggest rule is you shouldn't make other people feel bad. Wow. Wouldn't that make me feel bad if I'm making other people feel bad? What do you do about that? And they worry about negative judgments affecting their child's development. But you're not being tolerant of another person because you're worried about those negative judgments. Any statement that tells a person they should or shouldn't do, what they should or shouldn't do, is by definition a prescriptive statement. And here's the key when we're talking about morality. It's prescriptive versus descriptive. There's a difference. Okay? A prescription for a behavior is like a prescription for medicine. Medicine's prescribed to cure an illness. It doesn't matter whether you like the taste of it or not. It doesn't even matter if you're a diabetic and you have to get the insulin injection every day. You may not like needles. I get that. I wouldn't like needles too. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. You either take it or you don't. It's prescriptive. It's necessary for you. Moral laws are prescriptive. They're oughts. They aren't ises. Ises are choices like ice cream. They're flavors. They're personal preferences. How many of you like chocolate ice cream in here? How many? It's about time for ice cream, isn't it? How about vanilla? Okay, so see, now vanilla has a little bit more folks than chocolate. So if we're in a relativistic cultural society where the majority rules, we would say vanilla is the moral flavor and chocolate is the immoral flavor because more people like vanilla than chocolate. But with ice cream, with preferences, it doesn't make sense to talk about morality at all, does it? It's just what's your preference. But with morals, that's a bad idea. Because you can't say, well, I know you like to kill children, I just personally don't. It's just my preference. So you see the problem that it breaks down. Any statement that tells a person what they should or shouldn't do is by definition a prescriptive statement. To believe that morality is not similarly universal, as say medicine, means that the same prescriptions will not work in different cultures or contexts. But if we are to say something like stop being so judgmental because such actions are bad for people, then the relativist has underscored the fact that they believe there is an actual right and wrong way for all people to act. See, this is the beauty of asking, why are you so intolerant? Because what you're doing is you're showing them that they actually do believe that there's at least one ought, there's one prescription that they have for all of humanity, and that is, don't make other people feel bad. Well, where did that come from? Where do you get that? Why is that the one law that is inviolate? And if that is inviolate, if it's true that we should never make all people, then you can't say that everything is relative, because we at least know some things are not. I would venture to guess that even a relativist would have a problem with parents who never corrected any of their children's naughty behaviors. Right? Wouldn't you think that's true? If they allowed them to do whatever they wished. Our society would classify such parents as neglectful, as criminals. Right? We'd take the kids away, Child Protective Services would be called. We naturally recognize that moral boundaries are essential in raising quality human beings. To remove them is actually harmful. So when we look at our statements, if number one is true, number two has as much merit as the other. Therefore, to ask someone to either stop talking about his views or to try to change their approach is in itself not tolerant. So whenever somebody comes up to you and starts saying, that religion stuff, that you're offending people, you're being so intolerant, your question back to them can be, well, why are you being so intolerant right now? Because truly they are. Make sense? So far, so good. Okay, here's question number 2. Oh, by the way, this is the key that our society lives by nowadays. And you can see where the problem lies, right? Pretty clear. It's one of those self-refuting statements. Okay, question number 2. What about the problem of evil? Now, how many of you have heard this question? Why does God allow so much evil in the world? What about all the evil that we see? How come? What are we going to do about all the evil? William Lane Craig was giving a talk in San Diego that I was attending, and he was talking about the problem of evil and pain, and a woman actually asked him, well, what about the animals and all the animal suffering? Yeah. Why would God allow that? And I'm like, really? The animals are the thing that you're worried about? Well, here's the best way to answer a question like that, and that is, yeah, that's a great question. What about the problem of evil? How does your worldview deal with it? What do you think is the answer here? Because guess what? Christianity is not the only worldview that has to deal with the problem of evil. Every single person living has to think about the evil that's in the world and what we can do about it. Now, I'm going to give you 3 main kinds of folks and more or less what they think on evil. So first is atheism or naturalism. Naturalism says that the natural world is all there is. There is no God, right? All we have is what we see in front of us. Is there evil? Oh, yeah. Most atheists actually use this as an objection to even God's existence. So they hold that no God exists. Okay, so then what does the atheist think about the problem of evil? What's the solution? Well, there actually is no solution. Suffering will never be overcome. Right? Darwin said that nature is red in tooth and claw. that the survival of the fittest may include tremendous amounts of suffering. It may be eat or be eaten. Now it's more than that, but it has to include that. But suffering is just part of the way the natural world works. Evil is a real thing. There is no hope. Now, how would you like to deal with that one? Imagine you're an atheist chaplain going to see parents of a 2-year-old who's just been diagnosed with terminal leukemia. What do you tell them? Well, I guess she just wasn't as fit as others. It's just kind of the luck of the draw, and I'm sorry about it, but the natural world is red in tooth and claw, and that's all we got to do. So what is the atheist's response? See? Yeah. What about... Now, maybe they're not atheists. Maybe they're from an Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, Hinduism, New Age. I believe the world is all God. I believe that God is in everything. I believe that there's an inherent goodness in all people. Most of the Eastern philosophies would say that good and evil are merely illusory. In other words, they don't exist in reality. They're part of your distraction in heading toward the divine. So this is why you get a lot of meditation, a lot of chanting. You have to understand what the Buddha was teaching is that you can't feel too much pleasure, you can't feel too much pain, you can't feel too much love, you can't feel too much hate. You've got to draw into the center till you're centered, and you don't feel too much of anything at all, right? The yin and the yang symbol, you guys are usually familiar with that, where the white represents the good and the black represents the evil, and they're balanced. And in the white, there's a little black dot, and in the black, there's a little white dot. So there's good and evil, and there's evil and good, and really the whole thing is just part of the circle of life, and it's all an illusion until you get back to the divine essence. Whether in Hinduism, that's joining the great sea, you're becoming all one, or whether it's, the common saying is in Hinduism, you are like a raindrop that can do not much on its own, but once you are added to the great ocean, you lose all of your personal identity, and you become a roaring force, right? Whereas in Vedanta Buddhism and things like that, you are to become nothing. You are like a candle that has been blown out. So you cease to feel at all. You withdraw to the point you have nothingness. So the result for pantheism is you ignore reality, you ignore suffering because it's not real. You try to meditate, you try to not get too caught up in it, you do all these kinds of things. But if no evil really exists, then what you're actually doing is ignoring it. The third way could be a modified theism, maybe a liberal theologian, certain other folks who kind of just believe in a wishy-washy God. Well, God can't do just everything, Obviously, God has limitations, and that's why we see evil exist. He can't control it. He has to let it happen. The result of this modified theism is actually a God that's not in control, and therefore not truly God at all. Any God who cannot deal with the problem of evil isn't worthy to be called God. In the classic sense, in any God, and this is why we reject pantheism, the multiple gods, because all of those gods do not have control over the other gods. They are not all powerful. They are not all good. They are always in a struggle with other beings, with other entities. That makes them not God. And we have a problem with that. And again, how do you offer comfort to the Holocaust survivor or the child with cancer? You see the problem with the problem of evil? It's not as much a problem for the Christian as it is for everybody else. Because the answers that are out there for other people are actually pretty weak. Matter of fact, atheist Christopher Hitchens, don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Journalist, good rhetorician, but this is what he said. He had contracted esophageal cancer, passed away several years ago. And he wrote, "Before I was diagnosed with esophageal cancer a year and a half ago, I rather jauntily told the readers of my memoirs that when faced with extinction, I wanted to be fully conscious and awake in order to, quote, do death in an active and not a passive sense. And I do still try to nurture that little flame of curiosity and defiance, willing to play out the starting to the end and wishing to be spared nothing that properly belongs to a lifespan. However, one thing that grave illness does is to make you examine familiar principles and seemingly reliable sayings. And here's one I find that I am not saying with quite the same conviction as I once used to. In particular, I have slightly stopped issuing the announcement that, quote, whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. In fact," he writes, oh, did I miss it? There it goes. "In fact, I now sometimes wonder why I ever thought it was profound." And he's absolutely right. See, this is the problem with the problem of evil. Sometimes whatever doesn't kill you leaves you mortally wounded for several years before you die. Black widow spiders eat their mates. Okay? That's just the way things function. The concept of spreading your DNA is supposed to be supreme in life. So does that mean that rape should be a good thing? If evolution is true? If it's survival of the fittest? If it's, should we just rape? Well, no, we wouldn't want other people to do that to us. Oh, well, you wouldn't want to? So now we're again talking ice cream instead of insulin. See the problem? Now you're talking about preferences, what you'd want, versus what we should do. But again, that doesn't make sense. It's either an ought or an ought not. How do you deal if there is no God, if there is no prescriber, if there is no lawgiver? How is there moral law at all? We must understand as Christians that we have the answer to the problem of evil. This is the best thing that the problem of evil highlights, is that Christianity actually offers a solution to it where the other faith systems truly don't. Number one, we have to understand how suffering is to be perceived in the Christian life. Know that God understands our sufferings and cares about our situation. This is first and foremost, right? And we all hear this. We all know this. Luke chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 cents, Jesus asked. And what does he tell his disciples? And yet not one of them is forgotten before God. But even the very hairs of your head are numbered. Do not fear, you are more valuable than many sparrows. So if God doesn't forget a sparrow worth a couple of pennies, he won't forget you. He cares for you. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is near to those brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your cares upon him, for he cares for you. So you see these things. And just because we don't understand why we suffer, it doesn't mean that suffering isn't allowed for a reason. Okay, so I'm giving you the Christian picture now on the problem of evil. Just because we don't understand why we suffer, it doesn't mean suffering isn't allowed for some reason. James chapter 1, of course, the classic verse, consider it all joy, brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. One of the things that suffering does do for us is it builds us spiritually. It makes us more reliant upon God, more able to overcome, and more humble in our approach. I mean, imagine, do you remember the movie Man of Steel? Imagine if General Zod got his way and we had an army of Supermen. Imagine if you had a world of people who were immortal, who could never be hurt. They wouldn't even have to be immortal. Maybe they'd all die at 100 years old, let's say. But they couldn't be hurt ahead of time. They were invincible. Do you think our world would be better or worse with 6 billion people who are never feeling physical pain? What do you think? Do you think people would be more selfish? Do you think they'd drive any different? Anybody been on the 91 freeway? Okay. Yeah. Imagine, I can't get hurt. What the heck? Let's do it. Oh, we can, right? The cops' bullets won't stop me. Let's do it. whatever it is, do you really think that without pain in this world, our world would be better? Think about that. Paul says that he was given a thorn in the flesh by God, and God said, pray 3 times, my faith is enough for you. And Paul said, I accept it gladly. So just because we suffer doesn't mean there aren't reasons. Some of those reasons are to help us individually in building ourselves up to be ready for heaven. Others are to take our sufferings and in turn minister to others. But also some of them are to humble us, because a world of supermen would be actually a scary place to live. And God is working all things together for good to those who love him. Joseph as a good example, and I've used this example. Remember Joseph sold off, right? Nothing, poor kid. His brothers hated him because he got the nice present for Christmas, got the coat, right? And they all got rocks in their stockings or something. I'm not sure what it was. But he got the coat, the long-sleeved coat, which tended to mean that he was in charge. He got the administrator. He got the white shirt. They all got the blue collars. That's the easy way to think about it. And so he comes out one day and they go, oh, here comes the boss, the younger brother. So what do? They sell him to throw him in a hole till some Ishmaelite traders come along and sell him as a slave, right? So now instead of being with his family, he's sold off to a slave, gets sold to Potiphar, and he says, well, okay, I'll accept my fate. God starts working for Potiphar, does a good job, by the way. And is God faithful then in recognizing that? No, Potiphar's life lies about him being, trying something, and then he gets thrown in the dungeon, in the prison of Egypt. So it gets, oh man, now he's down here, right? And he has to spend 3 years there, and then finally Pharaoh has a dream, and Joseph interprets the dream, and blah, blah, blah. We see it. Now, most of the time when I tell people that story, they all say the same thing. Man, it's rough being Joseph. Nothing bad is talked about by, usually all biblical characters have some sin that they've kind of committed that you can point to. Even Moses, when he had to yell and crack the rock open and God put him in timeout, said, no, you're in the penalty box, you don't get to go over to the promised land. All of them seem to have some, Joseph and Daniel are the only 2 guys that don't seem to have any bad marks put against him. But why did Joseph just keep going, right? Down, 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 went down to Egypt, down to Potiphar's house, he was a slave there, down into the dungeon before God finally rescued him. You ever feel that way? You ever have a trial where it's I call it the Job syndrome, where you're saying, hey, naked I came into this world, naked I came out, blessed be the name of the Lord, then things get worse. And you go, what happened? Okay, that was Joseph. He's like, what happened? See, this is how we look at things. We look at things from our own personal perspective. Suffering, even worse suffering. Okay? Well, God, what took you so long? But think about what God was doing. Joseph was first running his family, which was maybe a little difficult, but not that much. Then God put him in a place where he had to manage more than his family. He had to manage an entire chief administrator's household. A lot of servants, a lot of people, somebody else's books, and he did a good job there. Then God put him in a place where he had to manage an entire government agency, a jail system. And now God said, okay, now that you've gone through my job training program, now you're ready to manage the world and the food distribution system. God grew Joseph's responsibility every step of the way. We see it as suffering, down, down, down. Joseph, actually, God allowed him to go up in more and more responsibility until he had the knowledge appropriate to do the job. And by the way, the nice thing about the question of the problem of evil is at the end, all evil is vanquished. God is actually doing something. Okay, the Bible's like the algebra book. All the answers are in the back. And so when you read Revelations chapter 21 and 22, you can see that evil is dealt with. Suffering does make us seek God more, which is our primary purpose in creation. And it is Christianity that offers this true solution to the problem of evil. Remember, no other faith system, all other faith systems talk about ways that you can appease their gods. Christianity is the only faith system where God comes down and suffers with us. God is not divorced from evil. God is not alienated from the evil that he sees in the world. He takes the evil onto himself to deal with it. Jesus' love caused him to suffer and die on the cross. The Father suffered. Imagine giving up your only son. I mean, I love my kids. I can't imagine giving up any one of my kids to help a sinful stranger. And my love isn't anywhere near the love the Father had for his Son, and yet he did that for us. The sufferings of this present age, as Paul said, are not worthy to be compared to the glories that are to come. And that's the blessing of Christianity. It gives us the power to deal with our difficulties. It gives us someone to appeal to who is actively working. But again, he's not, well, why doesn't he do it all right now? Would you like him to stamp out every sin right now? Yes. Great. Can you bring me your 1040, please? Because I want to run through your tax returns and see if you're a liar so that God can vanquish all evil. How about that? Is that a good idea? No? Can I check the speedometer on your car to see if you're violating any laws there? We want to vanquish that evil too. Oh, other people's evil we want to vanquish. Leave mine alone. You see the problem? This is why God allows evil in the world, because if he's going to purge all evil, he has to purge all evil. And that means nobody's excluded. What about the problem of evil? What's the answer for the atheist? Evil is what it is. What's the answer for the pantheist? It's all really just an illusion. What's the answer for the limited theist? Well, there's nothing God can do, so God's really kind of an impotent God. But the Christian holds the answer to the evil. So tell me, if the problem of evil is such a big deal, tell me how you solve it, because I'd like to know. Okay, question number 3. Can you tell me why you're not as skeptical about your morality as you are about mine or about God's? Right? You hear a lot of people. It's become more and more popular to call God on the carpet for certain things. Usually, if you have the problem of evil question, you'll get a follow-up with something like, yeah, but God killed all those Canaanites. He's a genocidal dictator, right? Richard Dawkins is all about this stuff. Matter of fact, I received this email from a gentleman, and it was maybe 2002, 2002, I think. I got this. And he said, I've been trying to figure out why God created the hurricanes that devastated the Gulf Coast, the tsunami so it was about 2006, I guess. I have been trying to figure out why God created the hurricanes that devastated the Gulf Coast, the tsunami in Asia, and allowed the devastation that occurred in New York in his name on 9/11. Why did God murder all those innocent people? What could have gotten him so miffed off to commit genocide? Has he been talking to Hitler or Idi Amin again? I do not believe in God, but I do believe man has the potential to be godlike in his kindness and generosity. Really? Where have you been going? After all, God was created in man's image. Perhaps that is why God is evil. Now, I am going to leave off. Now, the second paragraph has a whole lot of self-contradictions. Either man is godlike and he's going towards that way, or God was created in man's image and that's why God is evil. I'm not sure which way he's actually arguing here, but I'm going to leave that off to the side. But this kind of an objection is fairly typical when you're engaging folks in faith conversations. So what we can do is we can kind of flesh this out a little bit more. How is your moral judgment more correct than God's is when you're judging God? I mean, think about what you're saying when you're questioning God's motives. You're saying, I know more than he does, right? You're like the 2-year-old. Remember the 2-year-old who says, hey, I want cake this morning. I want candy for breakfast. No, you can't have candy. Well, the 2-year-old doesn't understand. She wants it. It's good. We've got some. What's the problem? You're being mean to me. You're making me suffer, Mom. Why don't you give me what I want? Right? This is what I hear. Because really, and the first thing that you have to ask a person is, how do you know that the moral standards that you are holding up right now are the correct ones? How do you know that the moral standards you're holding up right now are the correct ones? Because let's face facts, we have changed our mind on our own morality, and we do so all the time. How many of you believe the same things are right now that you believed, say, 20 years ago, when you were 16, even when you're 25, maybe just out of college, right? Ever thought about something that was permissible previously that you now believe is wrong? Happens to me, right? Ever think something was wrong back then? I mean, heck, talking to most people about same-sex marriage. President Obama, 2008, said he didn't believe marriage was for anything but a man and a woman. Bill Clinton said the same thing. Hillary was standing right alongside with him. All of a sudden, 10 years later, they changed their mind. They did a 180. How do you know that today's morality is better than yesterday's morality? Maybe the moral statement you're making today, you're going to flip on again 20 years from now. So we do this all the time when we change our minds on morality. Here's our prime example. You remember this scene? This is the famous Spider-Man scene, right? Peter Parker gets his powers, wants to make a little bit of money, becomes basically a cage match wrestler, wins. The guy at the door stiffs him. The owner doesn't pay him. This guy comes in to rob him. Now, Parker's not doing anything. He's not doing anything illegal. The guy stiffed him of a bill. The robber runs past him, and what does Peter Parker do? He allows him to go. Matter of fact, in the movie, he opens the elevator door, so the guy, hey, and the robber says, thanks. Turns out later on that guy was the carjacker who killed his beloved Uncle Ben. Did he change his mind on his action? Did he think what he thought was a right move for a right motive? Hey, this guy's stealing from me, so it's just desserts that someone steals for him. That maybe that wasn't the best moral approach to take in this situation. Heck yeah. This kind of stuff happens all the time. So, we change our minds on morality all the time. Now, in order to understand objective moral law, you have to understand that morals do have meaning. Morality is something real, right? Killing babies for fun is wrong at all times, for all people, everywhere. Even if you don't believe killing babies for fun is wrong, it's still wrong, right? If Hitler won World War II, succeeded with his great plan to exterminate all the Jews, and brainwashed everybody so that in 2016 we all believed that that was the best thing that happened on the face of the planet in the 20th century, just because we all believe it doesn't make it right. Popularity doesn't make it right. Everyone believes something is wrong, and morals mean something. They're important. So, now, somebody may come back, well, morality isn't really true. What you're actually saying is that morality is either A, emotive, which means that you're saying something that you really don't like. Ooh, I don't like that fact. So I'm calling it wrong. Or it's effective. In other words, it allows us to survive. Like cultures who are nice to one another, where the individuals are nice to one another, tend to do better than cultures that are selfish, and it's just a survival instinct. These are usually the two sides that people fall on. Well, we already talked about the I don't like that. It's ice cream versus insulin. It doesn't make sense, right? But effective, evolution selects societies that obey moral laws because they're useful to propagate the species. Well, that doesn't help us too much either. Because when you start thinking about effectiveness, the Romans and the Egyptians were very, very effective. They built pyramids and stuff that lasted for thousands of years, and they did it on the back of slave labor. It was a very effective way to run the world. So does that mean that slavery should be the moral thing to do? And in other words, it solves the problem of poverty, by the way, because if you don't have any money, you become a slave, and now your owner is feeding you. It's kind of like socialism in reverse, right? You do get someone to pay your meals and food, board, and shelter and that kind of stuff. It was more of an indentured servitude back in the ancient Roman days. It wasn't like the antebellum South. It's not the chattel slavery that existed in the United States. It was a little bit more free than that. It was a little bit more open. Slaves could own homes, for example. in the Roman Empire. They could own property. You couldn't do that if you were a slave in the South. But just because something helps society doesn't make it better. Like I said, I mean, World War II doesn't make sense. Human persons actually do have intrinsic moral value, and that's why we say slavery is wrong. We recognize that all people hold God's image, and equal things should be treated equally. Now, what makes us equal? I'm looking around the room here. Do you think anybody's equal to anybody else? Some people can jump farther, jump higher. Some people probably are more wealthy, some are less wealthy, some are more well-read, others are... We can differentiate ourselves. Some have perfect eyesight, some don't, right? Pick a category. Nobody's equal with anybody else, but we like to talk about all men being created equal. So what's that thing that makes us all equal? Well, it's the created by God. It's the fact that we all bear God's image. And that's the key that makes us equal. But if you don't have that, then where are you getting your moral basis from? I use the example as someone who's in the Confederacy, during the war, the Confederacy had to print money so that people could buy and sell. But after the war was over, guess what that money was used for? A whole lot of nothing, because there was no gold to back it up. There was nothing that made that money of any value. It was just... And morality is like that. Without anything to back it up, without anything to ground the morality, it becomes worthless and it's useless. So how do you know that your morality is better? Why aren't you as skeptical about your morality as you are, say, about God? What grounds your moral framework? What is the thing that gives your morality value, that tells you your right and wrong are the right and wrong we should follow? It's a good question. What makes us equal? Okay, number 4. How do you know your belief is true? How do you know your belief is true? And Daniel touched on this, but I want to give you 2 specific examples, and we'll do this fairly quickly. One is the idea that all beings have equal worth. We don't want to be accused of speciesism, where we're just, there was racism, and now there's speciesism, where you elevate humanity, right? You see a lobster is the same as an orca, is the same as a baby pig, is the same as a baby cow, is the same as a baby human, as a chicken, as an elephant, as a cat. They're all the same. They're all the same. And the second one I'm going to talk about is, quickly, biblical contradictions, or the contradiction claims that people have when they talk about the Bible, and I'll go quickly through these. The first is interesting. Animals are not different in degree. Animals are different in degree, not in kind. In other words, there's nothing special about humanity. We're just another animal on the planet. And I'm going to use the story of Binti. Binti, this was a interesting story out of the Chicago Zoo. She's a gorilla who became a bona fide hero, according to the newspaper accounts, by saving a 3-year-old boy who had fallen into the gorilla enclosure. And here's one of the screenshots that one of the tourists who was at the zoo took from his camera, from his phone. Binti picked up the boy gently, carried him to the door where the paramedics waited. Yeah, everybody was aghast, because you can see. See, first of all, Binti had just had a baby, and 800-pound gorilla, what do you do? Especially a gorilla with a maternal instinct already developed, who picks up this toddler who had fallen over. Scary stuff, you can imagine. But she picked up the child, she walked over to the pen, and the paramedic, and they're saying, you see, gorillas can even show certain levels of compassion. They understand the emotions, they understand what things were going on. Now, the trainers said that there was a little different story behind this. First of all, the boy was in no immediate danger, because the other gorillas were quickly shooed out of the pen. So Binti had the child, and the animal handlers made sure the other gorillas got out of there. Binti had been systematically trained before she gave birth to carry a doll and bring it to her keepers. They did this with her over and over and over again. Why? because young gorillas need antibiotics, they need nutrient supplements, all this other stuff. So this was done because many zoo-related gorillas failed to develop normal maternal instincts, and the zookeepers wanted to be sure that her impending newborn would receive immediate care. Now, Binti's feat was the equivalent, really, of a dog playing fetch. And she might as well have reacted very differently, even aggressively, had the boy not been knocked senseless by his fall. I mean, he was screaming and crying. It might have been a horror situation. The deeper problem, though, as Mr. Peterson more frankly acknowledges, is that it is the height of anthropomorphic absurdity. Anthropomorphic means just implying human characteristics upon animals. To project human values and behaviors onto other species, and then to judge them by their similarity to us. So we see things, we say, oh, that's very human, because we read into it. And then we say, you see, animals are just like us. And that kind of thing goes on over and over again. Well, here's the question. We know that lions, for example, practice brutal infanticide. There can only be one male in a pride of lions. And guess what happens to all the cubs if they're not careful? The male kills them pretty easily. In chimps, the ones that are supposedly closest to us, the next step down the evolutionary tree, so to speak, horrific violence and cannibalism occurs routinely among chimpanzees. Matter of fact, Jane Goodall, who spent quite a number of years living with the chimpanzees, recorded one case where a chimpanzee she named Passion repeatedly kidnapped the babies of other mothers and with the help of her own children continued to consume them. So now, are the chimps wrong in doing that? Does it make sense to say this male lion is wrong in killing his cub? No, it's not right or wrong. He's acting on instinct. There is no moral value there because he doesn't have the capability of understanding what he's doing. Human beings have the capability of understanding what we're doing. We understand morality. That's one of the things that make us different. That's one of the things that make us different. So, this is where, if you say animals are different in degree, not in kind, one of the things that you're saying then is that we can act on instinct. The sociopath, he just does what his body chemistry tells him to do, just like the lion does what his body chemistry tells him to do, right? So how can you deal with that? Okay. Next, how do you know that the Bible contains contradictions? This is another one. Well, the Bible has all those contradictions. I like this sign. I'm not sure why they want you to buy the frosted mugs, but I think it's so that they can imprison you, and you have to work in the back the rest of your life. That's my guess. Okay, before I go into this too much, and I appreciate what Pastor Daniel said, and he's absolutely right, we're going to go through this, but realize, guys, some of this requires us to be well prepared. In other words, don't bluff. Bluffing is wonderful for poker. It's a great strategy to use. If you're holding a 2 and a 7, maybe you want to think about something, okay? Bluffing, not good for witnessing. Because if you say, oh, the Bible, somebody comes up to you, the Bible's full of contradictions. And I've heard pastors say, well, all you got to do is hand them your Bible and say, show me some. Well, what if a guy turns to a page and says, right here, now what do you do? Who's won that debate? You see? Dangerous stuff. So make sure you study up on a couple of things. You can ask, what are they? Can you let me know? And if he says, well, I got this and this and this, okay, let me look at it. Let me go back and understand it. But don't just shove a Bible in their face. You can't show me any because you may find yourself out on the edge of a limb. Like this one, the resurrection accounts. How many women, we just read this, right? It's just Easter. How many women were at the tomb? John says 1. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark, saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. Who's there? Mary Magdalene. But Matthew 28, in giving the same account, says that there were 2 women. Now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. John doesn't talk about her. But Mark gives us 3 women. Oh my goodness. What are we going to do? When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome brought spices so that they might come and anoint him. That's Mark. And then you have Luke, which really makes a mess of things because there's at least 5. Now they were Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the other women, which is plural. So there's got to be, he names 3, there's at least 2 more, maybe more than that, with them, and they were telling these things to the apostles. And I have guys, even Bart Ehrman, I have atheists all the time. They can't even get the number of women at the tomb right. How can you trust the Bible? Okay, you see the problem here? Now, is this a contradiction? What do you think? Oh, I scared you all. No, it's not a contradiction. A contradiction would say there were only 2 women, or there were absolutely 5 women, or something like that. This is not a contradiction. Some authors of the Gospels will shorten accounts or only talk about the relevant people. We do this all the time. Okay? I went last weekend and saw Batman versus Superman. You guys, anybody see that? You saw it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Did you see it alone?
By myself, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, yes.
So you went all by your.
I went to the IMAX.
You went all by yourself.
I did.
You did.
I did. Well, who was in the
Did you guys see it? You haven't seen it yet. Who else saw it? You saw it? Just the 2 of you? And did you see it too? Did you go by yourself? No. Okay. Well, who went with you? But you just said you saw it. Why didn't you mention the friend? Because it doesn't matter, right? I asked you, and you told me. Okay? I told you I saw it. By the way, I saw it with my 3 boys. See, and this is what we do. Someone asks me at work, hey, what'd you do last night? Oh, I went to the movies, saw this. Oh, that's nice. Oh, did you like it? Yeah. We walk on, because he's just another worker, an acquaintance. But if somebody I know, hey, you and the wife didn't show up. Oh, yeah, the wife and I were going to the movies that night. That's why we couldn't come over to your house. Okay, so I talked about my wife now. But if my mother calls, I'm going to, yes, I took the wife and the boys, because she cares about everybody, you see? See the difference? But this is what we do. This is how we use language. Just because we don't include everybody doesn't make it a contradiction. It's just the way things are reported. And you can go, I have a whole class on this, so I don't want to beat this to the ground. There's much more that you can deal with. But know that these Bible contradictions generally aren't. They are easily solved. I had actually one guy tell me, well, you hear the contradiction, well, the Bible's wrong because it classifies the bat as a bird, and the bat obviously isn't a bird. And you go, okay, and what zoological classification system are you using? Are you using the one that was invented in the 17th century, in the 18th century? Yes. Well, the Bible was written about 3,500 years before that, in this passage of Deuteronomy that you're talking about. So why are you trying to make something that's 3,500 years old fit into a 17th or 18th century classification system? Does that make any sense whatsoever? No. I had another guy tell me that the Bible is wrong because the snails, it says in the Psalms that the snails melt away as they go, and they obviously don't. Like, it's poetry, dude. It's poetry. It's not meant to be taken literally. It's a poetic genre. It's called a metaphor, please. We do that too. The sun goes up. Well, actually, that's incorrect. Imagine going to a party with an atheist who wants to be scientifically correct at everything. Well, tomorrow when the sun goes up, I plan on exercising. Oh, well, you're wrong. You have to know that the sun isn't actually the thing that's moving. It's the earth rotating on its axis, and it falls into the line of the sun's rays. It's like, shut up. But with the Bible, they think that these things are okay. I don't know. Okay, last question. What would it take to change your mind? And this is a key question. This is probably the key question. What evidence would you accept? Imagine a person who says, there cannot be any God because there's no proof of God. And I would say, I can offer you miracles as proof of God. How can you know that there's miracles? Well, what would you accept as a miraculous claim? Well, I need to have something that's proven by science. Well, you do realize that by definition, miracles cannot be proven by science, right? They just can't. So would you reject any miraculous claim that's not scientifically proven? Yes, I would reject any miraculous claim that's not scientifically proven. Then what is left for evidence for the existence of God? What else is there? You have people's testimony, which we have, and we have reports of miracles. But you see, the atheist has put you in an impossible situation. The only things he'll accept are scientific, but the things that would prove your point fall outside of the category of science. It's like love. How can you prove you're in love? You can't. You can't prove it. You hook somebody up to an EKG, and love and fear look an awful lot alike. How do you prove love? An EKG doesn't do it. Matter of fact, when they do brain surgery, right, they keep you awake. Why do they keep you awake? Because the only way that they will know if you're thinking is if you tell them. They can't tell that themselves. Can you say this? Can you see the picture of the dog? There's all these tests that they do when they do different, there's no thing that they can use to measure. So what would it take to change your mind? And I'm going to use as my closing point this lady here. Anybody know Julia Sweeney? Remember her? She was on Saturday Night Live, stand-up comedian, became an atheist, and did a whole show, stand-up show, basically on why she left her belief system and why God isn't real. And in one of the articles, one of the interviews that she did, she said, quote, "To me, the Iliad offers more insight into human character and lessons than the Bible. You know, like Jesus was angry a lot. Like when he turned all those people into pigs and made them run off a mountain. He was so hateful. It was not just people, but to the pigs." She's worried about the pigs. "I felt upset for the pigs." Now, anybody see a problem here? Yeah, she's, okay. But then she goes on. "Yes, I know that the passages I cite have all kinds of theories and complicated layers of meaning. I know the theories. I know the way that people explain those passages. I've looked into it." How much have you actually looked into it? You can't even get the story right. It wasn't that God turned people into pigs. He cast demons out of people and into pigs. Deviled ham. It was right over the ham. She says, "But now it doesn't really matter, because when I, after a long learning curve, really understood how the Bible was put together, which stories were kept and which weren't, what political situations were in place, and what was useful to emphasize and so forth, then the Bible became a really interesting historical religious document to me. Inspiring, but not sacred. Very much the work of ancient man, not the inspired word of God." And she ends with, "So you see, telling me all about the meanings behind those stories is sort of beside the point at this point." Now, if I were to come up and correct her about the casting out of the demons, is that going to matter to Julia Sweeney at all? Should I even waste my time? This is why this question is so key. What evidence would you accept? And some people have actually been honest enough to say, there's really nothing. Okay. And I'll say, I'll believe that. I accept that. That's fine. Realize that you're closed-minded, and we'll just leave it at that. Move on. But you see the problem. So, very quickly to summarize, 5 questions. Why are you so intolerant? What about the problem of evil? Why aren't you more skeptical of your own morality? How do you know your beliefs are true, and what would it take to change your mind? And questions. I know we're just a little bit over, and you can all escape if you so desire. But do you have any, we can do 1 or 2 quick questions, and then I'm going to let you go. On this, or maybe even something else. Problem passage that you've read. I had a lady ask me about one early this morning, but I'll take whatever. Yes, ma'am.
What do you tell someone that how does God allow evil and not be evil?
How does God allow evil and not be evil? Well, there's a couple of things. The first thing that I talk to them about is the fact that what God actually wanted when he created human beings was a relationship. He wanted free creatures that could choose to enter a relationship with him, and that requires him to limit or to give them true freedom. If you're required to have true freedom, then evil is one of those. If evil is one of those necessary conditions. Anytime you have a choice, you can either choose to follow along with God or disobey God, right? It's A or B. You're either going to be doing God's will or you're going to be doing not God's will. And the difference is, when you do not God's will, that's the definition of evil. So in order to be free, you have to actually exercise that choice. I use the example of the little mechanical dog. My kids, when they were younger, they wanted a dog, okay? And I didn't want a dog. I was traveling a lot. I didn't want a dog. And they wanted a dog. So I brought them home this little, these are wonderful little dogs. They have 2 batteries, 2 AA's. And you put it on, you flip the switch, and it goes zzz, 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 like this. It goes, heh, 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 right? And it wags its tail, and it does a backflip, and then it does it again. And I said, we got our dog. He's like, what are you talking about? This is the perfect dog, I tell them. It comes to you when you want it to come to you. It barks, it wags its tail, it does tricks, it's soft to the touch just like a dog would be. I can put it up on the couch. I don't have to worry about it eating my slippers. I don't have to feed it. I don't have to pick up the little presents that it leaves in the backyard, right? No little nuts and bolts on the carpet or anything like that. It's the perfect dog. We go on vacation, I turn it off and put it on the shelf. Dad, yeah, 2 months later we had 2 dogs. What's the difference? Why would I want all those negative things? Because if you can't choose, you're a robot. If you have no volition to do something other than what the person wants, then it's not a true affection. It's not real. It's a program. This is why we get grossed out about all those guys buying the robots and for like their own personal pleasure. It's like, ew, don't do that. Real human beings are important. But in order to do that, they have to be able to choose something other. So God says, I understand that by creating human beings, they will actually be able to show love. They do show love, but they can also show rebellion. It's 2 sides of the same coin. Now, like I said in point number 3, God jumps in, deals with the evil because he knew it was coming, and ultimately at the end of the day, we have a universe, a new heavens and a new earth, full of souls who can freely show love, who will never sin. So this is all part of the process. We're not done with the creation order yet. The 7th day is still open. God is still working. And it's not until Revelation 21 kicks in that God finishes his creation, where he has completely good beings who worship him forever, who never do evil, death and sin are vanquished, and he gets what he wants. But we're still part of that process. So that's the kind of the short answer. Make sense? Yeah. I mean, I know my evil, I get it. And really, you can't explain this to a lady whose child is suffering. I mean, you can try and talk her through, but that's not going to help. All you can say is, look, all I know is God is going to be there. He's going to be there. I've had difficult times. My wife almost died giving birth to our 3rd son. For days she was in ICU. It was ugly. And all I can tell you is we may not understand all of it now, but there is a God who understands what you're going through because he let his son go through the same thing for our sakes, and he loves you that much. Romans 8 says that how can he who gave up his own son for us all, how will he not also with him give us all things, right? Which is one of the promises I really clung to. If God values our hurts so much that he's willing to sacrifice his only son on our behalf, that's a pretty big thing. And so you could say, we won't be able to understand everything. We're finite. We're limited. We're like those 2-year-olds. We don't get it all. The 2-year-old girl thinks, heck, my kids think I'm cruel if I'm taking them to the dentist. But we know it's for their betterment, right? It's part of what you have to go through. And in this world, the way this world works, we have to deal with the fact that evil exists until the point at which God makes all things right again. So it's It's not necessarily the easiest question to answer. That's not what I'm saying. But there at least is an answer. So, other questions? One more? Yes, sir.
The Jews, they're judged by God, and God's plagues go on. God announces plague judgments in Deuteronomy 28.
Yes.
So the things that came upon Israel as a result of their
Right.
and also of the wilderness.
Right.
Those examples of the hope that they had after the judgments fell on them. What kind of hope is there in a similar situation when God announces his judgments on people?
That's a good question, because Israel did suffer, right? In Deuteronomy 27, God pronounces the curses on the land of Canaan. And in 28, he says, now, and it's interesting, I think the actual text doesn't say, if you do these sins, these same judgments will come upon you. I think it actually says, when you do these sins, realize that the same thing's going to fall on you that happened to them. And it's true. When they were kicked out into Babylon and Assyria, these are the kinds of things that happened. So what kind of hope did they have is the first half of that question. And they obviously had hope. The book of Daniel clearly shows that even though Daniel was himself extracted, taken to the king's court, made to serve Nebuchadnezzar, a foreign king, that he understood that there were a certain number of days that this suffering was going to occur, and no more than that, and that God would be faithful to bring them back. And it says that Daniel started reading, and he knew in chapter 5, right, the 70 years was just about up. And that's why he knows to Belshazzar and says, Wade, number divided, your time is up. So he knew that the 70 years was going to be coming up. He understood that there was a finite amount of suffering that was going to happen. I think we can take that with us as well. That we know that this is one of the primary fundamental beliefs of the Christianity is that Christ is coming back again. We talk about the hope that is within us. What is the hope that the early Christian church talked about? It is the hope for the return of Christ and the putting back of all things into its right order. That God doesn't like sin and death any more than we do. Jesus wept at Lazarus' tomb, even though he was going to raise him up 10 minutes later. Why did he weep? Because he understood the pain that death brings, and sin causes that death. So he gets it. He's lived it. He's felt it. And at the end of the day, we know we have the hope that God will put all things right. And that's the hope we cling to, just like Daniel clung to his hope as well. Okay, thank you guys. I really don't want to hold you anymore. It's right now 5 o'clock. And we'll talk to you guys. Alan will be here next week. Make sure you come on out. Thanks. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.